Hello, in this video we're going to be going over some of the basics of graphing on a graph plot. So that means points, lines, and also we'll go over a couple of general things to know when you're graphing. So, if you've never seen a graph plot before, just imagine it's two number lines. So let's take a look at this, just one basic number line. We'll call this 0, 1, 2, 3. So in this direction, the numbers are increasing. And in this direction, we'll label it -1, -2, and -3. This direction, the numbers are decreasing. So, this simple number line is going to be a key component of our graph plot with the two number lines. Call this the x-axis for now. And don't worry about it being a letter, it is really just to give this straight line a name. So, if we just put a little dot right here, say at 1, we'd call that a dot. There's no other way to name its location than by calling it 1. But what if the dot was located somewhere here? Well, it's -1 for sure, but how do we clarify how high or low that dot is? And the way we're going to do that is with a second number line we'll call the y-axis. So just give me 1 minute here. All right, so now we see nice and big just ignore this over here. Our new x and y axis. So this is the very same number line from before, that x going straight across, but now we're introducing a new axis called the y-axis. You can remember it as x goes horizontally and y goes vertically. And just like we labeled before on the x-axis, this point here is going to represent 0. This, as we move to the right, the numbers are going to increase. So with each notch, we'll add a new number. So 1, 2, 3. I'm just going to stop there. And as we move to the left, the numbers are going to decrease. This is called a negative direction. So let's go ahead and label -1, -2, and -3. Now, you might be wondering what this is going to look like when we're labeling the y-axis. And if you tilted your head in either way to make this y-axis look horizontal, it will be labeled similarly as you would if you were turning your head. So, this area right here, where the two axes meet, is going to be 0 for both of them. So, if we are labeling the y-axis only, we could put a 0 right here. Now, you might be wondering which side of the y-axis is the positive and which is the negative, much like how the x-axis is split at the 0 or the origin where these two axes meet, and then on one side it's positive and one is negative. The above half of the y-axis, that is above the x-axis, it's higher, is going to be the positive area. So as you move further up the y-axis, numbers are going to get larger and larger. So counting up from 0, let's go ahead and put a 1, 2, and 3, all positive. Now we'll fill in the negative portion of this graph. I'm zoomed in to just a 1, 2, 3 area, but it's important to know that these axes go infinitely in all the directions that they're in. So if we were to write every single number, we would find a tick on the number line that represents negative infinity. And here, infinity. But don't worry about that. Now let's finish up the negative portion of the y-axis. So counting from 0, I know it's a little bit of a jump, but we'll count down to -1, -2, and -3. So these 4 basic cardinal directions, x-axis, the positive direction, x-axis in the negative direction, y-axis in the positive direction, and y-axis in the negative direction. You might be wondering, is there an easier way I can categorize a point on my graph? Like say, oh, I don't know the exact ticks where this little mark's at, but I just want to give a super direct but vague description of where it is. That is where things called quadrant numbers come in. These 4 regions of a graph plot divided by the x and y axes have names. This segment right here, this entire area, where both the x coordinate of a point, for example, and the y coordinate would be positive. This is quadrant 1. Now we're going to move in a counterclockwise direction. This quadrant right here is going to be quadrant 2, where the x coordinate is negative, but the y coordinate is still positive. Now, quadrant 3, we're going to continue to move counterclockwise, is where both the x and y coordinates are going to fall on the negative sides of each individual number line. And then the last quadrant is 4, where the x coordinate is positive, but the y is negative. These are not super important, but again, they can just be helpful to give a vague description of where a single number may be. So, what if you want to give a more clear description of where a single point may be? Let's go ahead and plot one. I'm just going to keep it on each tick mark for clarity. So we'll go right here. Just by using visual clues, we will go ahead and find this point's exact location. I'm going to just use my eyes and draw a dashed line to each X tick mark and Y tick mark that this point is in line with. All right, so on the X axis, we see this number 2, -2, is closest to where our point falls. Even though it's below it, it does not matter whether a point is below or above the x-axis. Where it is vertically compared to this horizontal line is the x-coordinate. So we see it's lining up here with -2. Now we'll do the same for the y-axis. We can see just by drawing a dashed line, you can do this in your head or out on paper. It is aligned with the -3 coordinate. So, if you wanted to state clearly in your work that this point is located at -2 on the x-axis and -3 on the y-axis, this is the notation you would give. Open parentheses, then you'd put your x-axis first. So, since this point is located at -2 on our x-axis, we will put a -2 following our open parentheses. Now, before you give the next coordinate, you're going to put a comma. This just helps keep them separated. If the numbers are containing decimals, it can get a little hard to read, so this comma helps separate the two coordinates. Now, secondly, we're going to put our y coordinate, and that is lined up with -3 as we determined earlier. Now, once your y-coordinate is written, you can close the parentheses. So, the way you read this is relatively simple. This point is just located at -2, 3. You just pause in the middle as if you're reading a comma in the sentence. So, let's go ahead and check out a larger plot where we can see everything super clearly. Not all graphing plots will have lines written out for you, but it is very helpful if, say, let's apply what we just learned. You wanted to graph a point that was located at 4, 1. We would navigate to our first, the x-axis, because that comes first, and we'll look for 4. It's going to be right here. So any point that begins with 4 will be on this area of the x-axis. So these points would all begin with a 4, and then you put the corresponding y coordinate afterwards. So let's go ahead and practice one again. Let's say we want to graph point -5, -2. So the x-axis always comes first. That is really important to remember. So to find -5, we would travel along to the negative half of our x-axis and find -5. So we already know it's going to fall along this -5 line. And then I think I said -2. So if we're looking for -5, -2, we'll do the same while remembering our point is going to be on this line. Let's find -2 on our y-axis. It's going to be right here. So we will trace the lines created that are perpendicular to each of these two areas, and where they intersect is going to be our point. So this point right here, I know I've covered it up, but it is -5, -2. And just to reiterate, it is super important that the x coordinate comes first, the horizontal position of the point. Then the y coordinate comes second, how high it is, high or low. Points are not the only thing that you can put on a graph plot, of course. You may also graph lines. So let's say we put a line down on the graph right here. What would we call this? How would we denote that this line is in the position that it is? Firstly, we are going to see if it is horizontal or a vertical line. This line right here is horizontal. And this may seem confusing, but though it is horizontal similarly to the x-axis, the way we are going to write this line's equation out is by using a y== equation. Because, as I said before, it is parallel to the x-axis. The numbers that it's crossing belong to the y-axis. So we can see here, this line goes straight across in a perfectly straight manner through the y coordinate of -2. So if we wanted to communicate that our line was located in this spot, the proper equation to do so would be y = -2. That will let whoever is graphing your line know that they will travel up or down the y-axis to find the -2 coordinate, and then at that spot, draw a straight line passing through it. So now let's give it another try. How about we will graph the line y equals 4. What we're going to do is travel up and down the y-axis looking for the y equals 4 coordinate. That is going to be up here in its positive half. There's nothing to it, you just draw a straight line. And because this graph has guides, you may just follow the line that is already there. Now, you can do a very similar thing when you want to graph a vertical line. So let's put a vertical line down on our graph here. And I just covered up the coordinate that said -3. So, very similarly to the process of graphing a horizontal line on your plot, though this line is vertical, just like the y-axis, the way we are going to write its equation out is by using x equals. Because it does have the vertical property of the y-axis, but it crosses directly a coordinate of the x-axis. And in this case, that is -3. Vertical lines will always use x equals to begin their equation, and horizontal lines will always use y equals to begin their equation. So let's practice drawing out another vertical line. If we were given the equation x equals 2, we would move right or left to find our x coordinate, and because we're looking for 2, it is right here. We can draw a straight line down using our guideline at 2. This entire line, to review, any point that falls on this line will share the first coordinate of 2 in the x spot, because the first coordinate is always the x-axis number. The y will come second. Now, let's do a bit more practice from earlier with the quadrants. I'm going to throw a point down anywhere on this plot, and we will decipher to see what quadrant it is located in. You can go ahead and think to yourself to determine which quadrant you think it is in. Feel free to skip back in the video to remember which was which. Okay, I'm going to reveal the quadrant that it was in. This is quadrant 4. I will just review one more time. The first quadrant is here, where everything is positive. Both the x and y axes have positive coordinates here in quadrant 1. Then you move counterclockwise. Quadrant 2, 3, and 4. Quadrant 1 and 3 experience where both the x and y axis have the same sign. Quadrant 2 and 4 experience where one is positive and one is negative. That is going to be all for this video. Just to review, we learned how to graph a point and determine where it is located. We also learned how to graph a line and write its equation. And of course, we learned about the 4 different quadrants.